Hi everyone, in this video we'll see default method. So let's get straight to it by taking an example. Let's say we have this interface called animal, and as you guys know, in interfaces we only have what we call abstract method. So let's create an abstract method eat. So we have no problem right here. But now let's say we want to add a new method, but this time we want it to have a body. So we want to create a new method. Let's call it, for example, sound. And we want to actually give it a body. For example, let's print sound to the console. Well, actually, we can't really do that because, as you guys know, in interface, we cannot have non-abstract method. But with default method, we can actually do that. It's pretty simple. We just add the default keyword, and that's it. And it will work just fine. Now, if we go to the cat class, we can implement the animal interface, and we only have to override the eat, and that's it. Because as you guys saw in the interface, we already give an implementation for the sound, so we don't really have to implement it in the cat class. So let's say here cat eaten. But if we want to override it right here in cat, we can actually do that. We can actually override the default method. There is no issue with that. But I won't really override it. So now let's go to the main class to execute. And let's create a new cat. New cat. And we can execute the default method sound, and it will work just fine. Okay, so we get the default method printed in the console, and it worked just fine. And by the way, we can also use default methods in functional interfaces. For example, let's say we have this functional interface. Let's give it the annotation functional interface. As you guys know, functional interface, we absolutely need to have an abstract method. Let's call it method. And then we can add our default method with no problem. Let's say return a void, another method, and we can give it a body. Let's print hi, and it will work just fine. We will actually execute an example. Let's say functional interface, and we can use lambda expression, no issue. Let's print hello, and we can use the default method, and we can use the method that we implemented in the lambda expression that we have called met. So let's execute and see. There we go, it worked pretty good. And by the way, default methods are used a lot in functional interfaces in the Java world. For example, if you guys know the consumer functional interface that we have in the JDK, it's actually have default method. So right here we have the accept abstract method, and we have another default method inside the consumer. So a lot of functional interfaces actually have this what we call default method to add some functionalities without the need to use a class or an abstract class. We can just do it inside the interface without having to create an abstract class. So now you might wonder if we don't really need abstract classes to have a method with a body inside the class, what is the purpose of having abstract class? Because now with default method we don't really need to have abstract classes. Well, actually the difference between interfaces and abstract method right now is the constructor. In interfaces we don't actually can create a constructor. If we try to create a constructor, we actually cannot because it's an interface. But if we use an abstract class, we can do that, and it will work just fine. We actually have some problems because here it needs to extend, not implement. And let's go to the main to test our abstract class this time, not an interface. So, or cat, not animal. Let's have a cat. New cat. And let's execute the sound, the default method. And by the way, I forgot, we don't really need to use the default. The default keyword is only used for interfaces. We don't use it for abstract classes. And we need to add the abstract keyword right here. And that's it. So we can use an abstract class. So this is the only difference between an interface and an abstract class is the constructor. And obviously we need to use abstract keyword for abstract method. This is the only difference right now. So if you need a constructor, you can use abstract classes. Otherwise, just use interfaces and add some default method if you want to. So now, if you execute this example, it should print the constructor right here. So it executes the constructor, and we had the method, our non-abstract method. Another thing that very useful with the default method is backward compatibility. And what I mean by that, so let's go back to the animal and let's bring it back to an interface. So let's say this is an interface. There we go. So let's say we have, I'm just gonna come on this default method. Okay. So let's say I have a project with this interface. Let me just use implement right here. So let's say we have a project, and this project implements our interface. Let's say it implements animal like here. So we obviously need to override it, and another class that implement animal. So we obviously need to override it. Okay, now let's say we have this project. So we have our interface. Okay, give me a moment. Okay, let's delete this. Okay, so we have our project with this interface, and this interface is implemented by a lot of classes, so by multiple classes. And one day I want to add a new feature to my interface. So I want to add a new method to my interface. So if I add an abstract class by default, it will give me some problems. Why? Because I need to implement this method in all my classes that implement the interface, right? So it can give some backward compatibility problems. Instead, if I don't want to do that, and I don't want to have some issues with backward compatibility, I can just use the default. So I can just use default keyword and give this this method a body, and that's it. It won't really give me any problem with these classes that implement the interface. And even if I want to override the default method, I can do that with no issue. For example, let's override it right here. We can do that with no problem. So this is basically what is default method. Thank you.